So K2SO, and I talk about this often, is a perfect example of how everything that you see in Star Wars is a result of a collaboration and a kind of a baton passing exercise. K2SO has many fathers. John Knoll is the first one because he was the one who originally came up with the idea of having, every good Rebel team needs a droid, right? And so originally, if you go back and look at the art of Rogue One, you can see like some of the very, very early drawings of of K2. Looks quite different, I think, than what we eventually settled on. But the original idea was he was called a logistics droid. He was an Imperial a Rebel logistics droid. And originally, it just basically looked like C-3PO, I think, but like skinned black, like black metal instead of gold metal, like shiny black metal. And he didn't have much of a personality because John just wrote a very thinly sketched outline. He didn't necessarily explain a lot about Jin and some of the others, but the android is just like a robot. Like, how interesting can that be? But one of the things we know, and one of the things that John did that I thought was fascinating was, we know that humor is an integral part of Star Wars, right? There's so many great funny moments. John, in fact, did an amazing piece of research that he did where he did a whole presentation on his theory of like humor in Star Wars and like when it works and when it doesn't. And the basic thesis, like the bottom line conclusion of it all was it works really well when it comes from character. It doesn't work as well when it comes from slapstick. So like the example that he gave was like just tiny moments, like when Han Solo first meets C-3PO in the docking bay and 3PO just says, "Hello, sir." And Solo just kind of like rolls his eyes like, fuck me, like I'm going to put up with this dude now. Like just a tiny moment, but it makes you laugh. And then an example of maybe humor that works less well is, Jar Jar slipping in shit, in the pod racing pits or whatever. Like it's just slapstick. And so if it comes from character,
with the mama jokes.
Yeah. So if it comes from character, it tends to work better. And one of the things, again, that we know that's kind of established in the spirit of Star Wars is that the droids are always a great catalyst for comedy. Obviously 3PO and R2's relationship, perfect example.
That comes from the Hidden Fortress.
Right, the two guys, right? Yeah.
So George Lucas's reference for the droids are the comic relief in the Hidden Fortress.
Right. And that ended up setting the pattern for like droids always being, and it's continued to this day. I mean, look at Chopper. And Chopper's like my favorite character to write for Star Wars Rebels because he's hilarious. And again, you can have fun with the droids. And so I was looking at K2 and he was a little bit of a blank slate. I thought, how can I make him more interesting? And the main idea that I pitched was, and rather than being a Rebel droid, let's have him being an Imperial droid that they captured and reprogrammed.
Oh, nice.
And now he works on the Rebel side because I just felt like there was all kinds of interesting stuff that would come out of that. And in earlier versions of the story, there was more that we did with that. The idea that like a lot of the Rebels didn't really trust him is like, how do we know that he's like fully reprogrammed? He might still be Imperial underneath. They never really trusted him. He had kind of, remember like when Russell Crowe scrapes off the Mark of the Legion in Gladiator because he's kind of renounced his masters. I always like this idea. There was a version, I think, in the early draft of the script that I did where he had scraped off all of his Imperial markings because he didn't want them on him anymore. But then when he had to go infiltrate the Imperial base, he had to paint them all back on, to look like a freshened up Imperial droid. And he hated having to do it because he had renounced the Empire. Where that all came from a character standpoint was the idea that like Imperial droids aren't funny, right? They're just like, yes, master. Like they just kind of, because the Imperials don't take any shit. Like you just do what you're told. And I always imagine they have these kind of behavioral restraining bolts attached to them that prevent them from being funny or talking back to their masters or whatever. But when the rebels captured K2, again, this is all just in my canon, but it informed everything that I had wrote for that character, that they had basically they'd flipped that switch to allow him to kind of have like full freedom of expression. And they'd kind of like taken the shackles off him essentially behaviorally. And I kind of felt like K2's like, now that I can finally speak my mind, you're gonna get my opinion every time, whether you want it or not. And so the idea of him being this kind of sarcastic and constantly kind of talking back to people and giving them grief, it's like, I remember there was a scene early in my draft where like Jin was like, K2, can you move that crate for me? He's like, you move it. You've got arms. You'll get me for. He was just like constantly like giving everyone shit. Like, if I don't have to do anything, I'm free. And he loved that. So John created K2. I gave him a personality. So I'm kind of like father number two, the recaptured Imperial droid who's kind of rediscovering his freedom. And then Chris and Tony and other writers continued to kind of, give him more of a voice, more of an attitude. And then Alan Tudyk comes along and gives him the literal voice and plays the character.
Yeah.
Hal Hickel and the team at ILM actually design the character and make his eyes move. And every single part of that is a part of creating a living, what, you know, tricks you into believing is a living being. So it's in the writing, it's in the CG, it's in the performance, in every single aspect. You kind of see how K2 evolves from, you know, a very thinly sketched character on the initial document to, you know, a character that now is like, I think, a lot of people's favorite character in Rogue One.